is a biblical scholar.
I told you not to say that.
I'm just reading what you told me. And,
Oh, that's right.
He's well-versed on everything. He's a retired professor of history. And so we're glad to have you, Marty. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you. Thanks for coming, guy. Bye. I appreciate that. Hopefully you'll get something out of this that you'll enlighten you a little bit about why things are the way they are in Israel. This is really more to do with Israel in the Arab conflict than it did with anything to do with Iran at this point. So it's not that pertinent as far as today's headlines. But we'll start out with the saying. If everybody can see the screen, okay? This is a quote out of Zechariah. Thus says the Lord, I have returned to Zion and will dwell amidst Jerusalem, and Jerusalem shall be called the faithful city and the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. Basically, Zion means Jerusalem. Okay, so that's another name. That's where you get the Zion name. I'm going to start out with where Palestine is. If we can see my map, my handy-dandy map. I can get my light to work. Well, you see it circled where Jerusalem is, Palestine. And in the year 1900, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, the Ottomans ruled that part of the region of the world for about 600 years. North Africa, the Balkans, the Middle East. Now you notice to the side of that area is Persia, the name Persia. Iran doesn't come into being until 1905 as a name of a country. So far.
But that was because of the, well, who drew the line?
Well, this is going to be after World War I. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is just to show you where everything is laid out. Now, the Ottoman Empire is falling apart. It's not as large as it once was. Countries are seeking their independence, like Serbia, Bosnia. They get their independence. And so Palestine is thinking the same thing along the same lines as they are. Now, remember, the Ottoman Turks are Sunni Muslims. All right. Hey, next is the Zionism, just the definition of it is a nationalistic movement of people into a Jewish state as what is now called Israel. The 20th century movement arose among anti-Semitism. This lecture is as much about the movement as is about the history of anti-Semitism. I'm going to go back hundreds of years to show you how all that started. And then beginning in the Middle Ages, people who weren't Jewish started to view Jews as a separate kind of humans. That's the right way to put it, like apart from everybody else. Any questions so far or comments? Remember, if you have any questions, raise your hand because I would like to answer those. All right, during the first millennium, the Jews were principal traders. First millennium meaning the year 10 to 1000. They were principal traders in Western Europe of commodities. Remember, the Jews were expelled from Jerusalem in the year 70 CE. Remember our Rabbi friend Larry from last month? He actually told the last part of the story. I'm telling the first part of the story. And he reminded us that the Jews were expelled from Jerusalem in 70 CE, and they scattered throughout, and that was the Jewish diaspora, so Jews are living in Europe now. And then, however, in the 12th century, things started to worsen. Christian merchants started to get into the businesses, trying to push Jews out of the areas of which they had prevailed and excelled. So gradually, they went from merchants to becoming usurers, loaning money at interest, okay, and also collecting rents for kings and nobility and so on. Okay, now here's where the troubles begin. The Lantern Decree of 1215, the Catholic Church periodically has a council, and they come up with new ideas or decrees, and two decrees came out of this council. One, the Jews were solely responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus. Romans are off the hook. Number two, antithetical for a Christian to engage in usury, you're risking hell's damnation of your soul if you engage in that practice. So the Jews are going to fill the void of being bankers. So then Jews were expelled from England, France, and Spain for a variety of reasons. The French expelled the Jews. Originally, they wanted the land. The particular king had fought a land with the Flemish, and he needed money, so he just takes their land and kicks them out. So, gee, that sounds familiar, right? So, and then Spain, when Isabel and Ferdinand became married in united Spain, they came up with the idea that Muslims and Jews in Spain must convert or leave. And they gave the Jews 6 months to convert and the Muslims 9 months. Now, they stretched the Muslim time out for a lot longer. They were a lot more considerate to the Muslims. But the Jews had to convert or leave. And so, of course, they did. They converted under torture, okay? The Iron Maiden, the rack, some of our favorite torture items. Yeah, they were very creative in those days. Now, here's my favorite, the bubonic plague. 1347, a ship arrives from the east in Italy, and there's rats on ships, which there generally is, but the rats were carrying fleas that carried the bacteria. And we didn't know what the bacteria was for 500 years. It was called Pasteurella pestis. So the rats are carrying these fleas, and the rats would eventually die because the fleas would infect them. And so eventually these sailors and these ships, all these goods would make their way into Europe, and rats were very common in those days, running around everywhere. And generally speaking, most people didn't practice good hygiene. They took about maybe 1 or 2 baths a year. And it's usually in June. And that's where you get June weddings from. The people would take a bath, say, hey, let's get married, we're clean, you know? So that became the tradition for June weddings. So anyway, but the Jews practiced better hygiene, plus they had cats because they had food commodities. They wanted to keep the rats and mice out of there. So when the rat would die, the flea would go to the cat instead of the human. So anyway, the Christians started thinking a way higher percentage of Christians were dying than Jews were, proportionally speaking. So they started thinking the Jews are in league with the devil, with Satan. They caused this disease. So what happens? They lash out at the Jews. There's massacres of communities and so on and so forth. And this is where we get a new word comes out of all of this, into our lexicon, and the word is scapegoat. The Jews were a scapegoat for the misery people were suffering in the bubonic. The plague was so virulent, it was said that you ate lunch with your friends and dinner with your ancestors. That's how fast acting. And almost 30% of Europe died from this bubonic plague. And the plague would come back every now and then and revisit, but it was never as virulent as its first go around. And they figured out it originated in Asia. Sounds kind of familiar? Okay, so see, nothing changes. They just change the names. All right, next. Now here we get the expulsion of Jews. These yellow areas are the areas of expulsion, and Jews are going to gravitate from Western Europe to Eastern Europe. And the king of Poland at this time was going to allow the Jews to move into that part of the country, part of their country at this time. Now, Poland will be taken over by a variety of countries later on, but for right now, the Jews are finding a better place to live in Eastern Europe, namely Poland and Lithuania, the Baltic states. And they had relative freedom and to practice what they were used to, the commerce. That's what they were big at, was merchants. The old Jewish proverb, buy for one, sell for two. All right? Okay. You remember?
I feel Sunday morning.
Right. Now, remember, he's my mentor. I mean, he's my guy that I go for, you know? So now we're going to fast forward into the 19th century to Russia. Russia has a lot of Jews. The assassination of Alexander II he's assassinated, one of the Romanovs. And there's a lot of misery comes about directly after that, a lot of economic hardship. So who do you blame? All right, see, this is right. So they're starting to loot, brutalize the Jews. These are called pogroms. And they actually go into the area of Poland, and start to terrorize Jews there too. So the association was made between the Jewish plague and the Alexander. Before I leave this slide, I got to make an historical connection here, a little irony. First of all, Russia derived its labor off called serfdom, and people were born on a plot of land. You could never leave that land. So in 1863, he announced what's called the Emancipation Proclamation to allow serfs to move more freely about Russia. And halfway around the world, in that same year, by the same name, Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation to free the slaves in what's considered slave-holding states. So it's just one of those ironies of history. You have the same thing happening in different parts of the world, and the one had no knowledge of the other, or what they were doing. So, don't you love the anecdotal stuff? I do. I like this. I love irony. All right. So next, these are some pictures of the pogroms. People in villages would kill the Jews, lay them out, and then take pictures. Why not? They were proud of killing them. This is kind of gets how brutal it becomes. There's a program. See these people? These are all townspeople having their picture taken with the dead bodies. Then here, the Cossacks slaughtered Jews in Odessa. They actually took a picture of them while they were killing them rather than after they were dead. So where are the Jews going to go? Well, we're going to find out where they go, okay? Any comments, questions? Okay, now, about Russia, prior to these pogroms, I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit. The Jews had already been moved into what is called the Pale of Settlement, which is actually Poland area, Poland, Lithuania. So the Jews were coming in from both sides into Eastern Europe. And the person that set all that up was Catherine the Great, Tsarina Catherine the Great. She actually, what's another irony of history is that Catherine the First was actually her mother-in-law. So that's kind of weird. You're not blood related, but yet she made it to the throne. So they took care of the old husband, get rid of the husband routine. Yeah, and she did. She got rid of the husband and took over. So anyway, so these settlements are all in what we consider Poland and Lithuania, Belarus today, Latvia. So here's the Pale of Settlement. This is where they settled. My light's not working, but you see the white area. And they fared poorly, obviously, because they were being persecuted in that region of the country, region of the world. So, but as each of these programs went along, Russians, Jews started to leave their country, and only about 2% of them went to Palestine. We'll talk about the Palestinians. The rest of them are coming to the United States and other places. So about 90% of the Jews had left, by this point, had left Russia already. All right, now,
Marty,
yes.
back in those days, if they were doing a lot of commerce, the Jewish people, and selling a lot of product, without the transportation we have today, were they still all kind of huddled or living in that same area and selling their wares?
Yeah, the Jews acted as middlemen for the farmers. Farmers couldn't farm. You couldn't just drive into town, truck farm, and sell your goods. You had to sell it to a middleman, which the Jews were. And, of course, they were spreading the commodities to all the place, to all the merchants, who were also probably Jews as well. The commerce is where they fared well. And then, of course, they move into the banking business. Now, ultimately, the four major banks in Europe, Berlin, Vienna, Paris, and so on, are all run by the Rothschilds, by Jews. They have the money, and they're going to finance a lot of this Zionist movement. So the money is there for them to use to buy the land in Palestine. Okay, now I'm going to get into anti-Semitism for a minute. That term had initially, remember Semitic, using the language that you spoke? Arabic, Semitic, Hebrew, Semitic, so on and so forth. Well, they coined this term anti-Semitism to frame up the Jews as being a less than human. And a man by the name of Wilhelm Marr, who's called the father of anti-Semitism, coins this term in 1879. Coined that term in 1879. Victory over Judaism. He's talking about the Jews taking over the world. This is always the thing that they always bring up, and Hitler does the same thing, is this Bolshevizing Jewry of the world are going to take over. It's going to be a world cabal takeover, blah, blah, blah. So pretty soon Christians will be paying to be a servant to the Jews. Okay. Yes?
Excuse me, what was the rationale of the Russian program? It wasn't plague, was not, what was the rationale?
Economic hard times, blaming the Jews. There was a lot of, Russia was going through some very difficult times in those times, and there was a lot of starving. A lot of millions of, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, as many as 2 million Russians died of starvation. Nicholas the Tsar, Nicholas II, was totally indifferent to what the Jews' plight was. He didn't care about his people either. He gets them into World War I, and that's a total disaster. But that's kind of what they were, just more or less scapegoats. Plus, people have something that you don't have. This is what Hitler does with the Germans and, the German shopkeepers in Berlin and in Germany. Hey, they've got something. You can have that if you go if you get rid of them, you can have their stuff. It's kind of. So anyway, Moses Zimmerman writes a book and says the Wilhelm Marr is the patriarch of anti-Semitism. So they find these leagues for anti-Semitism in Germany, 1879. So this begins the idea that Europe is ratcheting up its hatred towards Jews. But the movement hasn't begun in earnest yet. The Zionist movement hasn't begun yet. Now, some of the Russian Jews have made their way to Palestine, but very few. Remember, I said about 2% of the Russian Jews, of the 2 million Jews that lived in Russia or in the Pale Settlement, made their way down to Palestine. Now, anti-Semitism is in France as well. The man by the name of Jumon will write a book calling about and they start painting the Jew to be greedy, going back to Shylock and the Merchant of Venice kind of attitude, pound of flesh kind of thing. And so he will track many to his cause, and the Nazis will use his anti-Semitic literature to kind of further their interests. When Hitler writes Mein Kampf, which means my struggle in prison, he takes notes from these guys. He's using notes. He's building on that hatred to get a commonality of Germans together. Hatred will bring us together. Hatred of the Jews will bring us together. Not love. Not Captain and Tennille. It's sorry. Now here's the big tipping point. First of all, France and Prussia had a war called the Franco-Prussian War, 1871, and Bismarck wins. The Prussians win, and the Prussian people combined all the 30 German nationalities, and Germany was born. There was no Germany till 1871. Okay, now the French and the Germans hate each other. They still do. So they really hate each other. And so in 1894, a Jewish lieutenant in the French military was accused of selling secrets to the Germans. Now, they'd intercepted a letter, but it actually turns out it was a Hungarian minister to France that wrote it all down and sent it to his buddies in Germany, because Austria, Hungary, and Germany were combined together. They were in an alliance together. But they didn't care. Dreyfus was found guilty in the court of public opinion. He gets court-martialed, and he gets scapegoated in the press by Jumon. Our anti-Semitism man, he latches onto the idea that Dreyfus is bad for us, even though he was a loyal person, so on. So this man had already founded the Anti-Semitic League, but he was the reason that it's in the papers every day. And he called him a traitor up there, a traitor, condemned. Now there's a poster depicting him as anti-Jewish. Look at the snake. And the case divided the country politically, and anti-Jewish violence erupted in France. So now we're getting violence in France as well as Russia. Now he's convicted and sent to life imprisonment on Devil's Island. If any of you ever saw Papillon, the movie, the original Papillon, that's Devil's Island, French Guiana. Not a very nice place to live. So anyway, his wife is sure that he's innocent. She approaches a famous author by the name of Émile Zola. Émile Zola is a famous author in France, and he'll put up the money, and they'll get his verdict overturned. But unfortunately, the damage had been done. Now, there's a movie called Émile Zola, and if anybody ever saw the movie Majestic with Jim Carrey in the 90s, that movie was the movie that he would show periodically in the show. So Émile Zola was a famous character, and it was depicted in they did it in a movie. Hollywood actually did do this story in a movie. So if you ever come across that movie, Émile Zola, it's about the author who rescues Dreyfus. Okay. Any comments? Okay. Next, this is where the movement begins. Theodor Herzl is a Viennese Austrian Jewish journalist. And so he writes a book basically saying that the Jews cannot live in the land they have to have their own land. His motto was, a land for a people that have no land. Okay, there. And so he writes his work, The Modern Solution to the Jewish Question, Advocating a Jewish State. Now, they hold their first World Congress in Basel, Switzerland, and the opening line was, the aim of Zionism is to create for Jewish people a legally assured home in Palestine. Now, in the 1900s, the Jewish population of Palestine was 50,000. These Jews called themselves Sephardic Jews. Hear that term? They lived in the Mediterranean. Now, there's 400,000 Muslims living there, and there's actually more Christians than Jews right now in Palestine. There's 60,000 Christians. So, remember Jerusalem's quartered into 4 parts? You got Muslim, Arab, Israeli, Christian, so on and so forth, Palestinian. So, I don't know how the quadrants go, but. So by 1900, though, 1914, there's 90,000 Jews. So they've jumped up 40,000 in 14 years. Now, for the first 10 or 15 years, the people there, remember, it's still the Ottoman Empire. And so they kind of all see themselves as subjects of this Ottoman Empire, and they all get along. Like, hey, we're here to live and make a living like you are, and the Ottomans are in control. And the Jews didn't mind having a secondary status, so to speak. In other words, they were just happy to have a place to live and farm. They prospered on these farms. Now, the land's completely different in Israel than it is where they came from, so the farming was different for them. They had to work at really cultivating the ground. So they set up these agricultural settlements called kibbutzes. They're like collective farms. So the Jews started, when they started to move to Palestine and get the land, they decided, we got to buy land that's contiguous. And there's so much absentee ownership in Palestine, and they're offering so much money for the land that the absentee landlords are willing to sell that land. It's mostly on the coastline. They're offering 4 and 5 times as much as it was worth. Now, the Arabs in the hills, the Bedouins, not so much. They don't care about it. It ain't money to them. We ain't selling our land, and you ain't coming here. So this is where we're going to have a problem. The conflicts are going to come between the hill people, if you will, and the people on the coastline, because the people are buying up the land, therefore establishing ownership of that land, and the people that are on that land are being dispersed. So you have a beginning of what's called the Palestinian diaspora, people going into Jordan and other places to live, because the land's not theirs to work anymore. They never owned it; they just worked it or rented it. Yes.
Who was the preponderant owner, absentee landowners?
The Ottomans themselves. You make a good point about who. I would say the Arabs in Arabia and Syria and Jordan would probably have been the primary landowners. There was actually more absentee landowners than there was landowners willing to sell, because that's what they buy the land for. Everybody buys land to make money and speculate. So, of course, speculation drives the price up too. So they're offering 5 times as much. All of a sudden, my neighbor, I think I'm going to sell too. So they're selling the land. Now you'll see the maps, how the land they buy is contiguous. If I get to my map, look, I want to make this one point about anti-Semitism before I move on. During the course of the Dreyfus case, the trial, Russian immigrants that were in France decided that we're going to take the words of the first Congress of the Zionist movement and make it look like a world takeover. So it's a forgery. So they forged this book, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, okay? So they published this book, it proliferates. It takes almost 20 years to prove it as a forgery. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that Henry Ford required all his dealers to put a copy of that book in the front seat of the Model Ts for over 10 years, thereby ratcheting up anti-Semitism in the United States. So you see, this anti-Semitism it's far-reaching tentacles. So they distort the meaning of the whole Zionist movement, and it takes until 1921 that it's proved a forgery. The London Times finally proved it. The book is still in print. So I don't recommend you buy it, but at least not on Amazon. But. So it's a total fabrication, but the damage has been done. It's kind of like the lie gets out there before the truth gets out there, and so the lie wins today, and so on and so forth. Now, I'll show you the map in a minute. I'm going to get into the movement itself. Now, 1914, the war breaks out. And so the Russian Jews that living in England are going to kind of spearhead the move. Originally, it was Herzl out of Austria that was making the movement. Now it's going to be the Russian Jews living in England. And there's two people in particular, Chaim Weizmann, who's at the pictured at the top, and Baron Rothschild. He's the banker in London. They're going to ask the British government to help them facilitate a move into Palestine. Remember, it's still Palestine. To back up for a minute, the Roman Emperor Trajan renamed Israel Palestine in the year 118 CE. So it's been Palestine for almost 2,000 years. All right. Okay. I should have said that in the beginning, but better late than never. Okay, so we get this called the Balfour Declaration. James Balfour is a foreign secretary, and he advocates for the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So it starts to make, come together, Chaim Weizmann and others, and Baron Rothschild.
Do you think they did that to separate the Jews, thinking it would be less problem?
Yeah, it was the point where, remember the Ottoman Empire, I'm going to go back for a minute, they sided with Germany and Austria-Hungary in World War I, and they lost. Now by 1917, when Russia got out of the war and the United States entered the war, Britain knew they were going to win. So they're thinking, we're going to be taking control of that area. We got to figure out what we can do to get the Jews into some area where they could help us with a democracy. You see what I mean? Spreading democracy.
Yep.
Make sense? At least I hope it does.
Still trying it today.
Okay. Now here's my famous map, I guess. The the big dot is a Zionist town. You can see Tel Aviv and Jaffa. Those are Tel Aviv was the first big city. But they're buying up land more to the coastline. You see, there's more blue dots to the coast than there is in the center. But the people, this is going to be what's called the beginning of the British Mandate. We'll talk about that a little bit, because the World War I has now ended. And Britain and France are going to take control of the Middle East. It's kind of hard to see that map for us, but just basically want to see where the big cities were. Now, at the end of World War I, you have no more Ottoman Empire. So now remember, there's no boundary. Now, there's no Saudi Arabia either. So Britain puts the Saud family in front of Arabia, in charge of Arabia, and it becomes Saudi Arabia. They also create two countries out of the Balkans. They create Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. Now, they're not shown on my map here. They don't have it. Now, they don't exist anymore, but we grew up, those countries existed. Remember the Yugo? What a disaster that was. So anyway, but there's two countries. But now the important thing is for us, Britain's going to take control of Palestine. It's called a protectorate or a mandate. So you see on the map, the green is the British mandate up here, see where Palestine is right there. So they're going to control that region, and they basically did this drawing boundaries kind of not necessarily willy-nilly, but without any regards to the nationalities or ethnicities of the people there. Remember when ISIS rose up in the last decade? They wanted a one-world caliphate with no boundaries. They wanted to recreate the Ottoman Empire. This is what they want. But we have come in as Westerners, and of course we've divided the land up accordingly and charge of this and so on and so forth. So, and the French are the ones that put their people in charge of Syria. That's why when the bombing came in Paris, remember the bombing in Paris? It was Syrian terrorists. That's the backlash to that. So there's a lot of backlash to the things that they do in the Middle East. But for right now, the British are in charge of Palestine. Any comments, questions? Okay, now, in 1925, the Jewish population of Palestine was 108,000. By 1933, it rose to approximately 238,000. 20%. Remember, they're under that Balfour Declaration thing, that mandate. And by 1936, the Jewish population had reached almost 400,000, one-third of the total. Arab population feared that Palestine would eventually become Jewish state. Now, you know what happened? Who came to power in 1933 in Germany? Yep. So you see the exodus of peoples trying to get out of Germany. If you didn't get out of Germany by 1936, you pretty much didn't get out. That was pretty much the last. The Nuremberg laws passed in 1935, not allowing Jews to be teachers or lawyers anymore, even doctors, because they didn't totally get rid of the Jewish doctors until they had enough German doctors to take over. You know, they were sure that they were going to be stupid, but the Jews couldn't participate in the society as normal people. So there's going to be a Palestinian Arab revolt, 1936. Their goal, of course, was to end Jewish immigration to Palestine, end of transfer of lands to Jewish owners, and a self-rule representative government of their own. Now, Britain's got Palestine on their hands. What are we going to do? Well, first of all, these are the people, the terrorists, or if you want to call them, or the Arabs that are revolting. But this is what bothered England the most. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem met with Adolf Hitler, and England's worried about Adolf, thinking, oh boy, we better not get these Arabs on the wrong side of the ledger here. You know, this could not be good for us. Remember the oil, Suez Canal, so on and so forth? Okay. Now, Britain, the French actually built the canal, and the Brits bought it out from under them. It was a pretty cool scheme how they did it. But anyway, so the Brits are in charge of the Suez Canal at this particular time. All right, now, the Peel Commission has an idea. This is Britain's parliament, about partitioning the country between the two of them. So here they have you see the red part under British rule. The Jewish state would be in the north, and then the Arab state would be in the south. So there's actually land, plenty of land for that. But then you'd have to move all these people. When India and Pakistan broke apart in 1947, after Gandhi had arranged the change, over 1 million people died during that partition because of the violence perpetrated upon each other, the Hindus and Muslims. So it was that partition. Now that hasn't happened yet, but their fear of that could happen when they try to move people around, people resist it, and so on. So David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, supported the idea of a plan, but linked to Zionism. In other words, unlimited immigration. The commission allotted to the Jews to an area larger than existing holdings. So in other words, that map I showed you, the Jews don't own that much land yet. They're getting there. In other words, that's a bigger piece. If you totaled up all the land they held, but that's all going to change after World War II. Okay? So they recommended the forcible transfer of Arab population. Arabs were horrified by the proposal, so the revolt carries on. So now Britain, in fear of what the Arabs might do, placed restrictions on Jewish immigration in 1939. They limited immigration to Palestine to 75,000 people for the next 5 years. This is during the war years.
Was that 75,000 for the whole 5 years?
For the whole 5 years, yeah. It ended Jewish land purchases at that point. And they promised Palestine independence after the war. So they've sticking their neck out a little bit, Britain is. Now, Hitler says Europe will only have its Jewish question solved after the last Jew has left the continent. So from 1935 on, the cycle of anti-Semitism ratcheted up, and they became a failure scapegoat. The guy pictured in front of Hitler is Heinrich Himmler. He was head of the SS, the Schutzstaffel, the head of the SS. He was a chicken farmer before the war. So what an opportunist, from chicken farmer to he basically was second in command to Hitler. But that's what Nazis, he wanted people who were violent by nature. So here's I'm going to talk about the concentration. We know all about this already. And when World War II broke out, there were 11 million Jews in Europe. 6 million of them lived in Poland. That's why they put the death camps in Poland. Plus, at Krakow, this is where the train rails came together. North, south, east, west, outside Auschwitz. So this is why your death camps end up there. So they ended up exterminating 6 million Jews out of the 11, okay? And half of them were done in death camps. The Nazis had tried shooting them. That was too laborious, too many bullets, too psychologically. They used to just line Jews up. The Jews would dig a tunnel, a cave, and a grave, and then shoot them and push them in. Then they tried gassing them in vans, and they end up with the final solution, as they called it, gassing them in showers. So there's an oven, in particular, in the bones. There's a list of all the camps. So now, here's the Palestinian population distribution. Now, the war's over. And so this shows you the breakdown. The blue is the Jew, and the red is the Palestinian. So you can see toward the coast, there's more blue. Towards inland, there's more red. And Jerusalem itself, of course, is more red at this point. Now, the Arabs, of course, for themselves, the Muslims, according to legend, Muhammad ascended to heaven from the Dome of the Rock, or that area. So that's why Jerusalem's a holy city for them. Okay. Now, in 1945, King Saud of Saudi Arabia met with FDR, and FDR assured him, we'll make sure not too many Jews get into Israel, into Palestine. I give you my assurances of this. Well, FDR dies of a hemorrhage. And so who takes over? Harry Truman. And Truman's thinking politics. Jews are Democrats. I want their vote. I am going to be pro-Zionist. So he encourages Jews to go to Palestine. In 1920, there was 1 Jew to every 20 Arab. By 1947, it's 1 Jew for every 2 Arab. So it really is ratcheting up the whole thing. Any comments? Okay, 1947, the UN. Now the UN is formed in 1946, and they have what they call Security Council of 5 nations and so on. But they came up with a commission to study this idea of a partitioned country, so the Jews can have their homeland. Truman supported the idea of a Jewish state, and so the State Department's worried that pro-Zionists would push the Arabs into the Soviets. See, now your enemy is not the Germans, it's the Russians. Now remember, in 1955, remember what happens in 1955 in Egypt? Russia comes in to help the Arabs and basically promises them to build that dam. So the Brits gave away the Suez Canal back to Egypt, who it originally belonged to, and they built a dam for them. So the Russians were always there as a threat. This happens in the mid-50s. But in the meantime, this is what we're looking at. This is that partition plan. This is a new plan. Now this time there's more spread out. The Arabs are in the purple, and the Jews are in the brown, or whatever color that is. And so you see how they're spread out more, and they got more of the land to the south now. But neither side's really crazy about the idea of partitioning the country. So so the vote was 33 for, 13 against. The Arabs were to see 43% of the land, the Jews 57%. Neither one liked the idea. They scrapped the idea, and the UN just says, okay, Israel, here you come. Got a new nation, the nation of Israel. And that's it. Without any Arab participation, enough to allow them, they had any input into this idea. They kept rejecting these partition plans. So eventually you just get the state of Israel. Of course, what happens is Israel becomes a nation. Remember my friend Chaim Weizmann? He becomes the first president, and then David Ben-Gurion is the first prime minister. They have a hybrid system. They have a coalition. Remember the rabbi taught us about this coalition system they have. So they have basically two leaders. If you fly into I think it's Tel Aviv, is Dave Ben-Gurion Airport. I think they named the airport after him. Anyway, if you take a look at this map, see Israel up there, that little red sliver? Those are all the Arab nations that go up against them. Now you're thinking they're going to lose. They got no chance, right? Wrong. They win. They win the War of Independence. And the war starts the day after they declared their independence. They didn't wait very long. So they surrounded Israel, declared a war. Basically, it's Egypt. Egypt's the point team. That's the main country with enough military strength to carry the rest of them. Now, Syria's up north, and they've got their proxies or their military too, but nobody can match Egypt. And so the war was what was the bloodiest of Israeli wars. It cost 6,000 lives, almost 1% of the Jewish community. But they win and they prevail. Now, there's going to be more wars. There's going to be the Six-Day War in 1967, the Yom Kippur War, and then Intifadadas, and so on and so forth. So here is the War of Independence, decisive victory for them. This is showing the logistics of the armies. Now, what happens, though, too, is that all of a sudden you get so many more Jews moving in, and the Palestinians are refugees now. There's over 1 million Palestinians living in Jordan now in camps and have been there for generations. And the Saudi Arabians are financing them, keeping them afloat. That's why we like Saudis are our friend, and they're the ones paying to keep those people afloat. Okay. The Arab refugees, you see them moving into Transjordan or Jordan, Syria, and so on and so forth. You get the diaspora. It's called the Palestinian diaspora. That had already begun, though. Remember when the land was being bought and the Jews were buying the land, they were pushing what's called Bedouin tribes or Arabs off the land, and they were moving into other areas, either into Jordan or Syria. But Jordan is housing a lot of Palestinians to this day. So millions of people died in their efforts to survive anti-Semitism. Remember, you saw the stories of Jews being massacred and slaughtered and so on and so forth. Dreyfus Affair was a crime he did not commit. It was really a hoax perpetrated that he thought, there's no way I'm guilty of this because I didn't do it. Well, you got to get a good lawyer. And then modern anti-Semitism was different than the others because it dealt with ethnicity. Aryans were superior, Jews were inferior. Aryan meaning white and so on and so forth. So you see how they changed the argument from just being Jewish, the religion, to now they're inferior. And that's what Hitler did. They called them vermin, the Jews vermin. They have maps, like they would have a Jew and then a rat, like equal. No wonder the propaganda was so, Joseph Goebbels was a great propaganda master at the Nazi Germany. He was very good. So they're supposed to be an inferior race. So my last slide is, Zionists accept anti-Semitism as normal attitude of the Gentile world. If you hear anti-Zionism is really thought of anti-Semitism now. They're like equal, in a sense. Because what do they say? From the river to the sea, Zionists. Remember, they make this chant. So they're saying it's the Zionists that have caused all the problems. Okay? And the Jews moving in did change their makeup. As I said before, when the Russians Jews moved in, they were less willing to assimilate with the Jews that were already there. So the Russian Jews, or the big mass influx of Russian Jews, really changed the complex of everything. If it wasn't for the Russian Jews that came in, because they came in such mass all at once, and they didn't necessarily want to assimilate with the Jews that were already there. So you get this idea of separatism, again, going on again, and then looking down upon the Arabs instead of being, let's try to get along kind of thing. Nah, we want to prevail. They're below us, so. And then steps to enforce this movement took years and a lot of effort from many to make a new life for people. So the struggle still goes on and will continue to go on. The solution is probably a partition, but it's probably too late at this point to partition the land. That had to be done before the Jews were outnumbered, where the Arabs were outnumbered by the Jews. And the percentage of the land, see, that's the whole point. The Jews own a higher percentage of the land now than the Arabs do because they were willing to pay the price. There was a lot of money out there financing this movement, the Rothschilds in particular, that were able to get this done. People had a will. They had a will to get it done. Because the Jews had had problems for almost 1,000 years living amongst everybody else. They will never be accepted. That's what Herzl came up to the conclusion. The Jews will never be accepted into a place by others. They're always viewed differently. And some of those things that I mentioned didn't help the matters any. They helped anti-Semitism reach new heights. So that's my story. This is where Larry left off. Larry picked up last week or last month. So I kind of took it up, as John Campbell had mentioned, maybe I should have done this first and his second. It might have made more sense to let us as a continuum, and the story continued. Instead, you got the second half of the book, now you got the first half. Yes?
Given your beautiful desire and for history, and what was your passion that created that desire in you to know and learn and study and all of this?
It kind of goes hand in hand with what God's hand in history. Like, where does God figure into all this? Is he here? Is he there? Where is he? And I've seen things in history, things that happen in history, that just couldn't happen any other way than by God's hand at some point. So but that helped to actually strengthen my belief in the Lord, knowing these things about history. Now, there's certain periods of history I love in particular, like the Enlightenment and the exploration, the New World, and all that stuff. The 16th century is really a very interesting century. But beyond that, it's kind of like, and how do I fit into all this scheme of things? What does it matter? I always figured I want to learn history, so when I get to heaven, if I do, I got something to talk to God about. It's like, let's talk about the Civil War, But no, I mean, joking aside, I wanted to understand God's creation and where it fits and how humans are reacting to him and how we are forever making mistakes and not correcting them or so on. Yes?
Well, I think your talk was excellent.
Thank you.
Another comment, in my opinion, it seems like most of the Jewish community always votes Democrat.
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
Truman. They don't so much now as they did. Now, remember, a lot of people don't like Netanyahu. Remember his brother, he was in the Yom Kippur War, the raid on Entebbe. His brother got killed, and he was actually in the plane where his brother got killed. So he's very militaristic, very conservative. And a lot of people don't like him per se. But outside of that, the Jews vote Democrat, I think, because of Truman. Honestly, I think his legacy carried on that much. And I wish I had a better explanation for that than that. Yes.
Well, a lot of them got into the Democrat Party because of their connections with the 13 bloodlines, the Rothschilds and all those.
Yeah.
That's where the money was.
Yeah, right. And one thing I failed to mention, in World War I, the governments were borrowing money. They were borrowing money from the banks, and the Germans were borrowing from the Rothschilds. And when the United States entered the war, the Rothschilds cut the Germans off, said, no more money, you're going to lose. We're not throwing good money after bad. So when the war was over, Hitler steps up and says, those Jews stabbed us in the back. If we given the money, we would have won. See how they can momentum for that. So the Rothschilds banking industry, which was the biggest 4 banks in Europe at the time, financed the Zionist movement, but also financed World War I. Yes.
Do you have any ideas for humans today to help solve the solution to the problem other than God?
Pray to the Lord. Obey God. Remember the Old Testament? The Old Testament is like, hear and obey God. Simple as that. And if we get ourselves in that stretch of thinking, we'd have a collective thinking then, maybe very similar. So we wouldn't think, and we're not thinking outside the box, mind you. We're thinking, oh, God's in control. We got to look to God.
That's what we just said in women's Bible study.
Did you? I heard you. I could hear it. Yes, Ron.
Help me understand the lay of the land today.
Okay.
We have Jews and we have Arabs.
Right.
And I hear Palestinians, but there is no Palestine.
Right.
I understand.
Right, there is none.
There are Arabs, and there are different sects of Arabs, sects of
Yes.
Arabs.
Yeah, now Palestinian for all
Different Arab countries, but
yeah,
they're all Arabs.
yeah, for all intents and purposes, these are Arab, the Palestinians are Arab now, but Jerusalem is divided, I said, in 4 parts. Well, one section is Palestinian by itself. So you still have that nationality. Remember, they were around for 2,000 years, this Palestine.
But the Palestinians, not Palestine.
There's no Palestine anymore. Now, in their minds, it never did change. It's always been Palestine. We know Israel ceased to exist a long time ago. The Romans took care of that way back when. So they've got a different mindset about whose country this really belongs to. But see, yeah, but right, Jerusalem is the Zion, and this is what. Now, we had our embassy. We moved it to Jerusalem, and that was a move that upset the Palestinians. That move, because now we're moving into the holy city, and recognizing the Jews as this is a Jewish holy city and Christians. But it is for Islam too. For Arabs, it's their holy city, even though Mecca is there. Medina in Saudi Arabia was the birthplace of Islam, but Mecca is where they go to visit. They do their pilgrimage at Mecca. So the best way I explain is that they're Arabs. I think you could use that term and not offend anyone. Say they're Arabs, even though they're not in Arabia per se. Yes.
In Jerusalem, there's a Third Temple Institute.
Yes.
The current Zionists believe the Third Temple needs to be restored.
Okay. Okay. Well, you're talking about the Wailing Wall, not talking about Solomon. You're talking about the temple that the Romans destroyed?
Yeah, or the Temple of Mount.
Yeah, Mount Gerizim. Yeah.
Yeah, the Third Temple Institute wants to put the Third Temple in the Temple Mount area.
Okay, they do. Okay.
Do current day Zionists want that?
Well, I would think they do, but again, the Zionists couldn't agree. And after a certain point, the Jews that came from different parts of the world couldn't always agree on things. They're not really in concert with each other like you think they might be. So I really don't know how to answer that one. Of course, we see Zion as Jerusalem, and this is the ultimate home for God, for Jesus and God to reside, if you put it that way. They reside there. And so it would seem to make sense to them that they would want to do that. Probably more would than wouldn't. But we got to use that certain Zionism as kind of it's a catchy word because can't use it, you can't totally apply it to everything. But I think anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism kind of come together. They blend together. If you're anti-Zionist if you're anti-Semitic. Yes.
As I understand it, the Jews were taken out of Israel
Yeah.
To Persia.
Right.
And they were there for 400 years, living among the Persians. So when they came back to Israel, I mean, how did they just go right back to Judaism? I mean, they were living with the Arabs for
Yeah,
all this time.
actually they were in Babylon. In Baghdad would be modern day Baghdad. They remember they were there 70 years, and then when they left, only a remnant went back. Not all of them went back. In fact, King Cyrus, the Persian king that frees them, gives them the money to rebuild the temple, and they don't do it for about 80 years. So for some reason, they never got the traction again like they had once. And so the idea that Israel was what it was never the same after that particular period. And then we fast forward 500 years, and the Romans, the Jews left Jerusalem. The Romans basically expel them at that point, and then they really never come back again till the 20th century. So in a sense, it started hundreds of years before the Romans even took over, that they were already been taken out, and not a lot of them came back. It's in the Bible about a remnant, only a remnant returns. So that kind of began the whole thing back in 586 BCE. That's when all that took place. Yes?
Did the House of Rothschild have its origins in France, and about what date?
That's a good question. Yeah.
What was the question?
Yeah,
The question.
The Rothschilds. It could go as far back as 1400. It could go back that far, because that's when all this was happening with the usury. Remember, you couldn't loan. Christians were risking their eternal souls if they charged interest on money they lent. So the Jews filled that void, and they did that hundreds of years before. So that could go a lot far back. I bet it does. Yes.
So, speaking of money, do you know who coined the phrase, you want to find the answer to the question, you follow the trail of the dollar and it will lead you there?
Yeah, well, I think in about 90% of historical events, that's true. Not everyone, but for the huge majority of them, follow the money and you'll solve the crime or why they did what they did. Why did Hitler take the Jews out? Not only the hatred, he wanted their money. And this is when numbered Swiss bank accounts began. The Jews were hiding their money in numbered bank accounts in the Swiss. Now the Swiss guy collaborated with him, and he got some of that. Hitler got some of that money. He did. Yes. So Swiss weren't really neutral in the sense that you think.
I mean, money could buy them.
Yes, it was. There was a way out. Yeah. So all that hatred, though, people came together over that, and then so on and so forth.
Your favorite destination in the old country? Traveling.
You mean as far as Europe is concerned? Gosh. Like about half a dozen places. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it just depends on the time of year maybe you're going to. But England has always fascinated me. Spain fascinated. Spain was the most powerful country in the world in the 16th century. They were the richest country in the world, and they squandered all their money, all that gold they found in the New World. Philip II squandered it on a bunch of wars and stupid stuff, and Spain could have prevailed for centuries beyond what they were. But by the time the Spanish-American War rolled around, and the last thing they held was Cuba and the Philippines, they went down without hardly a fight. They gave it up. So they didn't have anything left. Spain really is the one that squandered their good fortune, the Spanish. But that's why South America is all Catholic and they speak Spanish. So the influence Spain had is far-reaching.
Well, the conquistadors in the Americas.
Right. They robbed and plundered and so on and so forth. But the Jesuits came behind them and converted everybody. So this is why you have the Catholic religion is so predominant in those countries. Or the Jesuits, they were the Society of Jesus. You've heard of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. Loyola of Ignatius, he was the one that initiated that.
It's hard to think of Spain as a power.
It is. It truly is. But to think of them now, like they're such an also-ran. It's like, I think of soccer. I think of Madrid and Barcelona. So, not Barcelona, I like to go to Barcelona. That's one place I'd like to go. My daughter loves that place. Yeah. Any comments? Any more comments? I appreciate you coming out. I hope you understand it a little better about how far back it goes. Nothing happens in a vacuum, mind you. It all happened hundreds of years and takes centuries of hatred to build up to where they finally come to the conclusion we have to have our own place. And of course, where else were they going to go? Now, one thing I do want to make mention of this before I go. During the Civil War in 1863, Frederick Douglass, he was kind of championing the slaves' cause, visited Abraham Lincoln, and Lincoln suggests, hey, after this war's over, you guys want to go down to Central America and make your own place? And Douglass goes, hell no. He goes, we stay here and fought and died for this place. We're staying here. We ain't going. So the idea that Lincoln, I thought he was thought, and everybody thinks he's kind of a prejudice because he mentioned, you guys ought to get out of here, because there was actually 3 million slaves in the country at that time, but Douglas saying, no way, we're staying. But anyway.
And MacArthur wanted to keep going north.
Yes, he wanted to bomb Red China. Bad idea. And that, of course, that helped Eisenhower win. MacArthur, if he hadn't opened his mouth, he might have won that next election, and we'd have MacArthur as president, and Eisenhower may not got elected. He shot himself in the foot. I'm going into commentary now. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
Does your mind get tired?
Well, it's got to go somewhere, right? So get it out. I appreciate you guys showing up. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
You're always worth an hour of time.
Oh, am I?
Wish it were
Well,
like
bless
2 or
you.
3.
Bless you for coming.
Oh, no.
Thank you.
Oh, I
Thank you.
wouldn't miss it.
Thank you for coming. I need support.
am so sorry I couldn't listen.